The silver moonlight cast long shadows over the dusty plains as Eliza Montgomery slipped through the back door of the ranch house, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild Mustang. Freedom was just beyond the horizon. If only she could reach it before anyone noticed she was gone. She had planned this escape for weeks, saving every penny, memorizing the stage routes, and now, with nothing but a small leather satchel and the clothes on her back, she was finally making her break from a life that had imprisoned her. Isaac Blackwood heard the soft creak of the door from his position in the bunkhouse. He wasn't asleep. He rarely slept soundly these days. Rising from his narrow cot, he moved to the window just in time to see a feminine figure hurrying toward the stables. A sad smile crossed his weathered face as he reached for the lantern hanging by the door. He'd been expecting this. With practiced hands, he struck a match and lit the wick, adjusting the flame until it burned steady and bright. "Run if you must, Eliza," he whispered to himself as he placed the lantern in the window facing the trail that led back to the ranch. "But I'll be waiting when you come back." The year was 1875. And the promise of a new life beckoned countless souls westward. For 23-year-old Eliza, that promise had turned bitter. The Colorado Territory had not been kind to her dreams. Eliza moved silently through the dark stables, her fingers trembling as she fumbled with the saddle. The chestnut mare snorted softly as Eliza whispered reassurances, praying that the sound wouldn't carry to the main house where her uncle slept. 3 years she had endured his household after her parents' death, 3 years of being little more than an unpaid servant, bearing his temper and controlling ways. "Just a little longer, girl," she murmured to the horse. "We'll be far away by sunrise." Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Isaac sat on the porch steps of the bunkhouse, the lantern beside him casting a warm glow against the encroaching darkness. At 32, he had seen enough of life to recognize a caged spirit when he saw one. He had worked for Douglas Montgomery for nearly a year now, hired as the foreman of Raven Creek Ranch, and in that time, he had watched Eliza's spirit slowly wither under her uncle's harsh rule. He took a sip from his tin cup of coffee, ignoring the late hour. Sleep would not come tonight. Not when he knew she was leaving. Not when he worried about a young woman alone on the dangerous trails, with only her determination and desperation to guide her. Eliza led the horse carefully out of the stable, wincing at each soft whinny and crunch of hooves on gravel. When she reached the edge of the property, she allowed herself one last look back at the sprawling ranch house that had never been a home. A light caught her eye not from the main house, but from the bunkhouse where the ranch hands slept. A single lantern burned in the window like a beacon in the night, her breath caught in her throat. Someone was awake. Someone knew for a moment. Panic seized her chest. But the house remained still. No shouts of discovery, no pounding footsteps in pursuit. With a shaky exhale, she mounted the horse and urged it forward, away from Raven Creek and toward the promise of Denver, where she might find work as a seamstress or perhaps a teacher's assistant. Isaac watched her silhouette disappear into the darkness, his weathered hands gripping the coffee cup a little tighter. He didn't follow. This was her choice to make, her path to walk. But the nights were cold, the road was hard, and danger lurked in many forms across the untamed frontier. So he kept the lantern lit, a silent promise that there would be light to guide her back if she chose to return. By dawn, Eliza had covered nearly 15 miles, her body aching from the constant riding. She had never traveled so far alone before. The vastness of the open country both terrified and exhilarated her. As the sun began to paint the eastern sky in hues of pink and gold, she allowed herself to slow the mare's pace and look for a place to rest. A small copse of cottonwoods near a creek offered shelter and water. Eliza dismounted stiffly, her legs nearly buckling beneath her as her feet touched the ground. She led the horse to drink, then settled herself against a tree trunk, pulling out a piece of jerky and a biscuit from her meager provisions. "We made it through the night, Penny," she told the mare, who flicked her ears in response. "That's something, isn't it?" But as the adrenaline of escape faded, doubt began to creep in. She had less than $20 to her name, barely enough to secure lodging and food for a week if she was frugal. What then? The stories of young women forced into unsavory professions when funds ran dry were not unknown to her. "I couldn't stay," she said aloud, as if justifying her decision to the morning air. "I couldn't let him marry me off to that awful Simmons fellow just to settle his gambling debts." Back at Raven Creek, Isaac went about his morning duties with a heavy heart. He instructed the ranch hands on their tasks for the day, careful not to reveal anything amiss. It wasn't until mid-morning that Eliza Montgomery's bellowing voice echoed across the yard. "Where is that ungrateful girl? Eliza, Eliza." Isaac steeled himself before approaching the red-faced rancher on the porch. "Something wrong, Mr. Montgomery?" he asked, his voice deliberately casual. "My niece is missing, and so is one of my horses," Montgomery spat. "The foolish girl has run off," Isaac feigned surprise. "I'm sure she hasn't gone far. Perhaps she went for an early ride." "Without preparing breakfast, without doing her chores," Montgomery scoffed. "No, she's run off, the thankless wench, after all I've done for her since my brother died." Isaac bit back the retort that sprang to his lips. All Montgomery had done was work the girl like a servant and treat her with less consideration than he showed his livestock. "Would you like me to gather some men to search for her?" Isaac offered, knowing full well he would ensure any search party he led would follow the wrong trails. Montgomery waved a dismissive hand. "No, let her go. She'll come crawling back once she tastes what the world has to offer a woman alone. Just find my horse." "Yes, sir," Isaac replied, his jaw tight. As Montgomery stormed back inside, Isaac glanced toward the horizon where Eliza had disappeared. "Be safe," he whispered. The sun climbed higher, bringing with it the full heat of the Colorado summer day. Eliza dozed fitfully beneath the trees, dreams of pursuit and capture jolting her awake every few minutes. By early afternoon, she knew she needed to move on. Denver was still days away, and she couldn't afford to linger. Mounting Penny once more, she continued eastward, following the crude map she had memorized from her uncle's study. The landscape gradually changed from open ranch land to more rugged terrain, with rocky outcroppings and deeper ravines. The beauty of it would have captivated her under different circumstances. As the afternoon waned, dark clouds began to gather in the western sky, promising a summer storm. Eliza eyed them warily, knowing she needed to find shelter before the rain came. The next town was still miles away, according to her reckoning. The first fat drops of rain began to fall as she spotted a dilapidated cabin nestled against a hillside. It appeared abandoned, its windows dark, no smoke rising from the chimney. Desperate for shelter, Eliza guided Penny toward it. The door hung crookedly on rusty hinges, opening with a mournful creak when she pushed against it. Inside, dust covered every surface, but the roof seemed mostly intact. It would do. Eliza unsaddled Penny and secured her in a lean-to attached to the cabin just as the heavens opened. Rain pounded on the roof as she explored her temporary refuge. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and crude furniture, a table, a chair, and a rope bed frame with no mattress were the only furnishings. "Better than nothing," she murmured, brushing cobwebs from the chair before sinking into it. Thunder rumbled overhead as she contemplated her next move. The storm might last hours, and darkness would fall soon after. The prospect of spending the night alone in this desolate place sent a shiver down her spine, but she had little choice. Using what little dry wood she found stacked beside the fireplace, Eliza managed to coax a small fire to life. Its warm glow chased away some of the cabin's gloom, but not her growing unease. Outside, the wind howled, driving the rain sideways against the cabin walls. A particularly loud crack of thunder made her jump, and in that instant, she thought of the lantern she had seen in the bunkhouse window. Had that been Isaac's room? The quiet foreman had always treated her with a gentle respect that stood in stark contrast to her uncle's harshness. Sometimes she caught him watching her with something like concern in his deep brown eyes. "Stop it," she chided herself. "You're not going back. Not ever." But as the storm raged on and the lonely night stretched before her, Eliza couldn't help but wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. At Raven Creek, Isaac moved the lantern from the bunkhouse window to his small private room at the end of the building. As ranch foreman, he had the luxury of quarters separate from the other hands, a cramped space barely large enough for a bed, a trunk, and a small table, but it was his own. He kept the lantern burning through the day and into the evening, even as the storm descended upon the ranch with fury. The other hands huddled in the main room, playing cards and trading stories, but Isaac remained apart, listening to the rain pounding on the roof and thinking of Eliza out there somewhere. "You're mighty quiet tonight, Blackwood," remarked Tom Riley, one of the younger cowboys, as he poked his head into Isaac's room. "Something troubling you?" Isaac shrugged. "Just the storm. Makes my old injuries ache." It wasn't entirely a lie. The bullet he'd taken during his brief, regrettable stint as a Union soldier 15 years ago still made itself known when the weather turned. "Heard the boss's niece took off," Tom said, leaning against the doorframe. "Stole his prized mare, too." "Is that what he's saying?" Isaac kept his voice neutral. "Yep. Said she was ungrateful after all he did for her, planning to send the sheriff after her for horse thieving if she doesn't bring it back." Isaac's hand tightened around the book he'd been pretending to read. "That's so." "Seems harsh to me," Tom continued, oblivious to Isaac's tension. "Girl always seemed nice enough, quiet though, kinda sad." "Montgomery doesn't take kindly to people crossing him," Isaac said carefully. Tom nodded. "Well, can't blame her for running, I suppose." Word is he was fixing to marry her off to old man Simmons to cover some debts. "Simmons?" Isaac looked up sharply. "The cattle buyer. He's got to be 30 years her senior." "At least," Tom agreed, "and not what you'd call gentle with the ladies from what I hear." A new worry gnawed at Isaac's gut. If Montgomery was truly planning to involve the sheriff under false pretenses, Eliza could find herself in serious trouble. Horse theft was a hanging offense in some parts. After Tom left, Isaac paced his small room, debating his options. He could ride out after her, but in this storm, tracking would be nearly impossible. And if he left now, it would only raise suspicions. No, better to wait until morning than request time to search for the stolen horse. Montgomery would likely agree, eager to have his property returned. In the abandoned cabin, Eliza huddled closer to the dying fire. The storm showed no signs of abating, and her provisions were running dangerously low. She had been too hasty, she realized now. She should have planned better, saved more money, waited for fairer weather. A sound outside the cabin made her freeze, the whinny of a horse that wasn't Penny. Her heart leaped into her throat as heavy footsteps approached the door. Frantically, she looked around for something to use as a weapon, settling on a rusted fire poker leaning against the hearth. The door burst open, revealing a massive silhouette backlit by a flash of lightning. Eliza raised the poker, her hands shaking. "Stay back," she cried. "I'm armed." "Well now," drawled a deep voice, "that ain't no way to greet a fellow traveler seeking shelter from the storm." The man stepped inside, water streaming from his wide-brimmed hat and long coat. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and eyes that glinted with amusement at her defensive stance. "Name's Jedediah Barnes," he said, removing his hat to reveal matted gray streaked hair. "Don't mean you no harm, miss. Just looking to get out of this deluge." Eliza didn't lower the poker. "This cabin is occupied," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Jedediah chuckled. "I can see that, but it's big enough for two, and I ain't about to ride on in this weather." "How about a truce? You keep your side, I'll keep mine." Eliza hesitated. The stranger didn't appear immediately threatening, and turning him back out into the storm seemed cruel. Still, she knew all too well the dangers a young woman faced alone. "Fine," she said at last. "But I'll keep this with me." She indicated the poker. "Fair enough." Jedediah moved to the opposite side of the cabin, shrugging out of his wet coat. "You got a name, miss?" "Eliza," she replied, then immediately regretted giving her real name. "Traveling alone?" he asked, eyeing her saddlebags. "My husband is hunting," she lied. "He'll be back soon." Jedediah's bushy eyebrows rose, but he didn't challenge her obvious falsehood. Instead, he began rummaging through his own saddlebags, producing a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "Well, since we're sharing quarters for the night, might as well share some supper too," he said, unwrapping what turned out to be dried beef and hard biscuits. Not fancy, but filling. Hunger won out over caution, and Eliza cautiously accepted the food he offered. As they ate in silence punctuated by thunder, she studied her unexpected companion. Despite his rough appearance, there was something grandfatherly about him that gradually eased her fears. "So," Jedediah said eventually, "where you really headed, girl? And don't tell me more lies about a hunting husband." Eliza stiffened. "That's my business." "Sure it is," he agreed easily. "But I've been riding these trails 40 years, and I know a runaway when I see one. Might be I could offer some advice." "I'm going to Denver," she admitted after a long pause, "to find work." Jedediah nodded thoughtfully. "Denver's growing fast, plenty of opportunity there, I suppose, but not all of it savory for a young woman alone." "I can sew," Eliza said defensively, "and I've had some schooling. I can read and cipher." "Good skills," he acknowledged, "but Denver's still a rough place. You got family there, friends?" Eliza looked away. "No, Jedediah stroked his beard. "Well, if you're determined, there's a settlement about a day's ride from here. Pine Creek. Small place, but decent folk. My sister runs the general store there. You mention my name, she might give you work for a spell, let you earn some money before tackling Denver." "Why would you help me?" Eliza asked suspiciously. Jedediah's eyes grew distant. "Had a daughter once. 'Bout your age when she left home. Never did find out what happened to her." He shrugged. "Just seems right is all." The sincerity in his voice touched something in Eliza. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll consider it." As the storm continued to rage outside, they fell into surprisingly comfortable conversation. Jedediah told tales of his years as a trapper and guide, while Eliza shared carefully edited stories of her life before coming to her uncle's ranch. Neither asked too many pointed questions, respecting the other's privacy. When exhaustion finally overtook her, Eliza curled up near the fire, the poker still within reach. Despite her initial fears, she slept soundly, the presence of another human being providing an unexpected comfort in the wilderness. Morning broke clear and bright, the storm having spent its fury during the night. Eliza woke to find Jedediah already up, tending to the horses. "Storm's cleared," he announced when she joined him outside. "Pine Creek's that way. He pointed eastward. "About 20 miles. Roads likely muddy but passable. Tell Martha I sent you." "I will," Eliza promised. "Thank you for your kindness." Jedediah tipped his hat. "Safe travels, Miss Eliza. Whatever you're running from, I hope you find something better ahead." With that, he mounted his horse and rode off in the opposite direction, leaving Eliza to ponder her next move. The encounter had shaken her confidence in her original plan. Denver suddenly seemed overwhelming and distant. Perhaps a smaller settlement like Pine Creek would be a better starting point. Decision made. She saddled Penny and set off eastward, the morning sun warming her back as she left the cabin behind. At Raven Creek, Isaac rose before dawn, determined to begin his search for Eliza. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed clean sky and mud-slicked trails. Tracking would be easier today, though the rain would have erased many signs of her passage. He found Montgomery in the kitchen, bellowing at the cook who was attempting to prepare breakfast without Eliza's assistance. "Mr. Montgomery," Isaac said, removing his hat as he entered. "With your permission, I'd like to take a couple of men and search for your horse." Montgomery grunted. "About time. Take Riley and Martinez. And Blackwood," he added, fixing Isaac with a hard stare. "I want that mare back unharmed." "The girl? Well, we'll see what the law has to say about horse thieves when you find her." Isaac's jaw tightened, but he nodded respectfully. "Yes, sir, we'll head out right away." Within the hour, Isaac, Tom Riley, and Miguel Martinez were riding east, following what Isaac suspected would be Eliza's most likely route. He had chosen these two men carefully. Both were decent sorts who wouldn't be overly zealous in pursuing a young woman whose only crime was seeking freedom. "We should split up," Isaac suggested once they were well away from the ranch. "Cover more ground that way. Martinez, you head northeast toward Silverdale. Riley, take the southeast route toward Grayson. I'll continue due east. We'll meet back at Crossroads Junction by sundown." The men nodded and split off in their assigned directions. Once alone, Isaac urged his horse to a faster pace. If his guess was correct, Eliza would be heading toward Denver, and the most direct route would take her near Pine Creek. Meanwhile, Eliza was making slow progress along the muddy trail. Penny struggled in the worst spots, forcing Eliza to dismount and lead her through. By midday, her boots and the hem of her dress were caked with mud, and her initial optimism had faded considerably. When she crested a small rise and spotted a curl of smoke rising from what appeared to be a chimney in the distance, she nearly wept with relief. That had to be Pine Creek. Another hour, perhaps two, and she would reach it. The settlement was smaller than she had imagined, just a cluster of buildings along a rutted main street. A general store, a smithy, what looked like a small church, and a few houses. No saloon, she noted with relief. That suggested a more respectable community than some of the wild mining towns she had heard about. She dismounted in front of the general store, its windows displaying an eclectic array of goods. A bell jingled as she pushed open the door, and a stout woman with iron-gray hair pinned in a severe bun looked up from behind the counter. "Good afternoon," the woman said, eyeing Eliza's bedraggled appearance. "Can I help you? Are you Martha?" Eliza asked hesitantly. The woman's eyes narrowed. "I am. Who's asking? My name is Eliza Montgomery. I met your brother Jedediah during the storm last night. He suggested I might find work here in Pine Creek." Martha's expression softened slightly. "Jed sent you, did he? Well, that's something. He doesn't usually take to strangers." She studied Eliza more carefully. "You running from something, girl?" Eliza hesitated, then decided honesty might serve her better than more lies. "My uncle, he was planning to marry me off to settle a debt." Martha clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Men and their arrangements." always trading women like cattle. She came around the counter, her practical calico dress rustling. You look dead on your feet. There's a room above the store, not much, but it's clean. You can rest there while we figure things out. Gratitude washed over Eliza. Thank you. I can pay something for board, and I'm willing to work hard. We'll discuss terms after you've rested, Martha said firmly. First things first, let's see to your horse, then get you cleaned up. The next hour passed in a blur of kindness that nearly undid Eliza's composure. Martha arranged for Penny to be stabled at the livery, showed Eliza to a small but indeed clean room above the store, and even provided a basin of warm water and a change of clothes that had belonged to her niece. Dinner's at 6, Martha informed her. Store closes at 5. Rest until then. Left alone, Eliza sank onto the narrow bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. For the first time since leaving Raven Creek, she allowed herself to truly breathe. Perhaps there was hope after all. Isaac reached Pine Creek by mid-afternoon, his keen eyes scanning the small settlement for any sign of Eliza or the chestnut mare. The livery stable seemed the most logical place to start. He dismounted and approached the blacksmith who was working at his forge. "Afternoon," Isaac greeted him. "I'm looking for a young woman who might have passed through here today, riding a chestnut mare with a white blaze." The blacksmith, a barrel-chested man with forearms like tree trunks, paused in his hammering. "Might have," he said noncommittally. "What's your business with her?" Isaac recognized the protective caution in the man's tone. "I'm a friend," he said carefully. "She left in a hurry and I'm concerned for her safety." "Uh-huh." The blacksmith wasn't convinced. "Gotta name this friend of yours, Eliza Montgomery." The blacksmith's expression revealed nothing, but his eyes flicked briefly toward the general store across the street. It was enough for Isaac. "Thank you for your time," he said, tipping his hat. He crossed the muddy street to the general store, hope rising in his chest. The bell above the door announced his entrance, and a stern-looking older woman glanced up from her ledger. "Afternoon, madam," Isaac said politely. "I'm looking for, let me guess," the woman interrupted. "A young woman on a chestnut mare." Her eyes were sharp as flint as she assessed him. "And who might you be?" "Isaac Blackwood, madam. I'm the foreman at Raven Creek Ranch." "Ah," she closed her ledger with a snap. "Come to take her back, have you? To that uncle who was going to sell her off like a prize heifer?" Isaac's heart sank. So it was true. The rumors Tom had mentioned weren't exaggerated. "No, madam," he said firmly. "I came to warn her. Her uncle's claiming she stole the horse. He's talking about getting the sheriff involved." The woman Martha, he presumed, studied him intently. "And you rode all this way just to warn her?" "Out of the goodness of your heart," Isaac met her gaze steadily. "Yes, madam." Martha seemed to come to a decision. "She's resting upstairs. Been through quite an ordeal, that girl." "I don't want to disturb her," Isaac said quickly. "Just need to make sure she's safe, and let her know what she's facing." "Well, you look like you could use some coffee," Martha observed. "And perhaps we should discuss this situation before you go barging upstairs with talk of sheriffs and horse thieving." Isaac nodded gratefully. "That's very kind, madam." Martha led him through a door at the back of the store into a small but tidy kitchen. She gestured for him to sit at the worn wooden table while she put a pot of coffee on the stove. "Now then," she said, once she had poured them each a cup, "tell me exactly what's happening at this Raven Creek Ranch." Isaac explained everything: Montgomery's tyrannical treatment of Eliza, the plans to marry her off to Simmons, and now the threats to involve the law under false pretenses. "The mare was her mother's," he finished. "Montgomery claimed it as his property after her parents died, but by rights it belongs to Eliza. It's not theft." "Rights don't always matter much out here," Martha observed grimly. "Especially for women." No, madam, they don't, Isaac agreed. That's why I came. She needs to know what she's facing. Martha sipped her coffee thoughtfully. And what do you propose she do, Mr. Blackwood? Go back to that ranch and submit to her uncle's plans? No, Isaac said firmly. Never that, but she needs to be careful. Maybe move further east where Montgomery's influence doesn't reach. Or, he hesitated. I have some savings, enough to buy her passage to California, perhaps. A fresh start. Very generous, Martha noted, her eyes shrewd, for a ranch foreman to offer his savings to his employer's niece. Isaac felt heat rise in his face. It's not like that, madam. Isn't it? Martha raised an eyebrow. I've lived long enough to recognize when a man cares for a woman, Mr. Blackwood. The question is, does she know? Before Isaac could respond, a floorboard creaked overhead, followed by soft footsteps on the stairs. A moment later, the kitchen door opened and Eliza stood there, her eyes widening in shock at the sight of Isaac at the table. You, she breathed. How did you find me? Isaac rose slowly, not wanting to alarm her. I followed the most likely trail to Denver, he said. I needed to warn you. Your uncle is claiming you stole his horse. He's threatening to involve the sheriff. Eliza's face paled. Penny was my mother's horse. He has no right, I know, Isaac assured her, but that won't stop him. You should have heard him bellowing when he realized you were gone, Isaac continued, a faint smile touching his lips despite the seriousness of the situation. Woke the whole bunkhouse. I'm not going back, Eliza said firmly, her chin lifting in defiance. I won't marry Simmons. I'm not asking you to, Isaac replied gently. I just want to help you stay safe. Martha cleared her throat. Seems to me you two have much to discuss. I'll leave you to it while I mind the store. She gave Isaac a pointed look as she passed. Remember, she's under my roof now and I don't tolerate any foolishness. When they were alone, an awkward silence fell. Eliza moved further into the kitchen, but remained standing as if ready to flee again if necessary. The lantern, she said suddenly. In the bunkhouse window, that was you, wasn't it? Isaac nodded. I heard you leave. I wanted you to know you had somewhere to come back to if you needed it. Why would you do that? He looked down at his coffee cup, gathering his thoughts. Because I've watched you these past months, Eliza. Watched how your spirit dimmed a little more each day under your uncle's thumb. It wasn't right. So you pitied me, she said, a trace of bitterness in her voice. No, Isaac said firmly, meeting her eyes. I admired you, your strength, your kindness, even when faced with cruelty, and when I realized what Montgomery was planning. He shook his head. I couldn't stand by and let that happen. Eliza studied him, really looked at him perhaps for the first time. The quiet foreman who had always treated her with respect, who had occasionally intervened when her uncle's temper flared, offering to handle tasks that would have taken her away from Montgomery's immediate presence. What happens now? She asked softly. That depends on you, Isaac replied. If you truly want to go to Denver or beyond, I have some savings. It's yours. Why would you give me your money? Eliza asked, bewildered. Because everyone deserves a chance at freedom, he said simply. Eliza sank into the chair opposite him, overwhelmed by his offer. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Isaac assured her. Just know that the offer stands. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant murmur of voices from the store. I lit a lantern too, you know, Eliza said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Inside me, a small flame of hope that someday things would change. It was almost out when I finally decided to leave. Isaac's throat tightened at her words. And now, she gave a small, wondering laugh. Now I think it's burning a little brighter. Their conversation was interrupted by Martha's return. Got a customer asking about you, Mr. Blackwood, she announced. Says he's from Raven Creek too. Young fellow, rather anxious-looking. Isaac tensed. Tom Riley. He's one of the men who came with me to search for Eliza. We were supposed to meet at Crossroads Junction by sundown. Eliza's eyes widened in alarm. You brought others. I had to, Isaac explained quickly, to avoid suspicion. But Tom's a good man. He won't betray you. Martha snorted. Well, he's pacing out front like a nervous cat. Better go talk to him before he wears a trench in my porch. Isaac rose. Stay here, he told Eliza. Let me handle this. He found Tom outside, hat in hand, looking relieved at the sight of him. Blackwood, there you are, found sign of the girl. Isaac nodded, lowering his voice. She's here, Tom, safe. Tom's shoulders sagged in relief. Good. That's good. Listen, I ran into Martinez on the way here. He says there's trouble. Montgomery didn't wait for us to report back. He rode to Silver Falls himself and got the sheriff all riled up. They're forming a posse, claiming the girl not only stole the horse but took some valuables too. Isaac swore under his breath. That's a lie. She took nothing but what was hers. I know that, and you know that, but the sheriff's just hearing Montgomery's side. Tom glanced nervously toward the store. They're probably not far behind me, maybe a couple hours, if that. Thank you for the warning, Isaac said, clasping the younger man's shoulder. You should head back now. Say you found no sign of her. No need for you to be caught up in this. Tom hesitated. What about you? I'll handle it, Isaac said grimly. Now go on. And Tom, I won't forget this. After Tom galloped away, Isaac returned to the kitchen where Eliza and Martha waited anxiously. We have a problem, he announced, quickly explaining what Tom had told him. Eliza's face drained of color. Valuables? I took nothing. Just my mother's locket and I know, Isaac assured her. But your uncle is determined to bring you back one way or another. Martha's expression had grown thunderous. That man sounds like a real piece of work. Well, she can't stay here now. They'll search every building in town. We need to leave, Isaac agreed, immediately. But where will we go? Eliza asked, fear evident in her voice. Isaac considered their options. West, into the mountains. I know some old trapping cabins where we could lie low until this blows over. Eliza repeated, looking at him in surprise. I'm not leaving you to face this alone, Isaac said firmly, if that's all right with you. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, trust, perhaps, or the first fragile threads of something deeper. Yes, Eliza said softly. That's all right with me. Martha bustled into action, gathering supplies and packing food while Isaac went to ready the horses. Within 20 minutes, they were prepared to leave. There's an old trail behind the livery, Martha told them as she handed Isaac a bundle of provisions. Hardly used these days. It'll take you up into the foothills without using the main road. Thank you, Eliza said, embracing the older woman. For everything. Martha patted her back awkwardly. You take care of yourself, girl, and you, she fixed Isaac with a stern look. You take care of her, you hear? Yes, madam, he promised solemnly. They slipped out the back way and around to the livery where their horses waited. The blacksmith, apparently in Martha's confidence, simply nodded as they mounted up and pointed them toward the barely visible trail that wound behind his property. Godspeed, he murmured as they rode past. The trail was narrow and overgrown, clearly unused for years. It climbed steadily into the foothills, winding through stands of pine and aspen. Isaac led the way, occasionally glancing back to ensure Eliza was managing the difficult terrain. They rode in tense silence, both acutely aware that pursuit could be close behind. The afternoon sun began its westward descent, casting long shadows through the trees. Isaac kept a careful eye on their surroundings, alert for any sign of followers. As dusk approached, he spotted what he was looking for: a small cabin nestled in a grove of pines, its weathered logs nearly invisible against the darkening forest. "We'll stop here for the night," he announced, reining in his horse. "It's one of the old line cabins the trappers used. Basic, but it should be secure." Eliza dismounted stiffly, her body aching from 2 days of hard riding. "Will they find us here?" "Not likely," Isaac assured her as he helped her lead Penny toward a small lean-to beside the cabin. "This place isn't on any maps, and the trail we took is all but forgotten." The cabin's interior was dusty but sound. A stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with a single chair, and a narrow cot were the only furnishings. Isaac quickly checked for unwelcome wildlife, then set about building a fire while Eliza unpacked the food Martha had provided. "It's not much," she apologized as she laid out bread, cheese, and dried meat on the table. "It's a feast compared to trail rations," Isaac assured her with a smile. As the fire caught and began to warm the single room, some of the tension eased from Eliza's shoulders. They ate in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts about the day's dramatic turn of events. "What will happen now?" Eliza asked finally, voicing the question that had been haunting her since they fled Pine Creek. Isaac considered before answering. "Your uncle can't maintain a posse indefinitely. Men have their own affairs to tend to. After a few days, most will return to their homes. Once the immediate hunt dies down, we can consider our options." "Our options," Eliza repeated softly. "You keep saying we and our." Isaac met her gaze across the fire. "I've cast my lot with yours, Eliza. I can't go back to Raven Creek now, not after helping you escape. Unless—" He hesitated. "Unless you'd prefer I leave once you're safely away." "No," she said quickly, surprising herself with her vehemence. "I mean, I'm grateful for your help. I don't know what I would have done without it." A small smile touched Isaac's lips. "Then we'll figure this out together." As night deepened outside, the howl of a distant wolf echoed through the mountains. Eliza shivered, despite the fire's warmth. "You should take the cot," Isaac said, noticing her fatigue. "I'll keep watch." Too exhausted to argue, Eliza curled up on the narrow bed while Isaac settled himself in the chair, rifle across his knees. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was his profile silhouetted against the firelight, steady and vigilant. In her dreams, she was running again, but this time there was a light ahead, not the lantern in the bunkhouse window, but something brighter, beckoning her forward toward a future she couldn't quite make out, but that filled her with a strange, tentative hope. Isaac watched Eliza sleep, her face finally peaceful in repose. He had acted on impulse, something he rarely did. His life had been governed by caution since the war, each move carefully considered. But when Tom had told him about the posse, he'd known instantly that he couldn't simply warn Eliza and leave. His path was now irrevocably tied to hers. The night passed slowly. Isaac dozed intermittently in the uncomfortable chair, waking at every sound from the forest outside. By dawn, his back ached fiercely, but his resolve remained unshaken. Eliza woke to the smell of coffee brewing. She sat up, momentarily disoriented by her unfamiliar surroundings, then remembered the events of the previous day. Isaac stood by the fireplace, pouring the dark liquid into 2 tin cups. "Morning," he greeted her. "Sleep well, better than I expected," she admitted, accepting the cup he offered. "Thank you for everything." Isaac nodded, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "Hungry. There's still some bread left." They broke their fast in companionable silence. Outside, the morning was clear and bright, sunlight filtering through the pine boughs to dapple the forest floor. "I should check the trail," Isaac said when they'd finished eating. "Make sure there's no sign of pursuit." While he was gone, Eliza took stock of their situation. Her initial panic had subsided, replaced by a growing determination. She would not let her uncle dictate her fate, not anymore. Whatever came next, she would face it with courage. Isaac returned looking relieved. "No sign of anyone. I think we're safe for now. What's our plan?" Eliza asked, straightening her shoulders. Isaac sat across from her, his expression thoughtful. "We have several options. We could head further west, maybe all the way to California, or north to Wyoming Territory. Plenty of new settlements there needing skilled hands." "And what would we do there?" Eliza asked. "I can sew and cook, but those skills are common enough." "I've worked cattle most of my life," Isaac said, "but I've saved enough that we could maybe buy a small plot of land. Start fresh." The casual way he included her in his future plans made Eliza's heart beat faster. "Why are you doing this, Isaac? Truly? You've given up everything to help me." Isaac was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the fire. "When I came back from the war," he finally said, "I was lost. Spent years drifting from ranch to ranch, never staying long in one place. There was a darkness in me that I couldn't shake." He looked up at her. "Then I came to Raven Creek and I saw you tending that little garden behind the kitchen. You were singing to yourself, something soft and sweet, and for the first time in years, I felt something like peace." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. "I don't understand." "Neither did I at first," Isaac admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Just knew that when you were around, the world seemed a little brighter. Took me a while to realize what that meant." "And what does it mean?" Eliza asked, barely above a whisper. Isaac met her gaze directly. "It means I care for you, Eliza, more than I thought possible, and if all I can offer is my protection and friendship, that's enough. But I couldn't stand by and watch your light be extinguished by a man like your uncle." Eliza was silent, overwhelmed by his confession. In the year since Isaac had come to Raven Creek, she had hardly spoken more than a few sentences to him at a time. Yet in those brief exchanges, there had always been a kindness, a respect that stood in stark contrast to how her uncle treated her. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything," Isaac assured her. "I didn't tell you to obligate you in any way, just wanted you to understand why I'm here." A noise outside broke the moment, the distant sound of voices and horses approaching. Isaac was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "Stay here," he ordered, moving to the cabin's single window. Eliza's heart hammered in her chest as she watched him peer cautiously through the grimy glass. "4 riders," he reported, his voice tight. "Coming up the main trail, not the one we used." "The posse," Eliza whispered fearfully. Isaac shook his head. "Don't think so, they're moving too casually. Probably trappers or hunters." He relaxed slightly. "Still, better if they don't see us. No need to draw attention." They waited in tense silence as the riders passed by the cabin without stopping, their voices fading as they continued up the mountain trail. Only when the sound had completely disappeared did Isaac lower his rifle. "That was close," Eliza breathed. "Too close," Isaac agreed grimly. "We should move on. This cabin is too near the main trail." They packed quickly, erasing all signs of their presence. Within an hour they were back on horseback, following a game trail that Isaac assured her would lead them deeper into the wilderness, away from any likely pursuit. The day was warm, the mountain air fragrant with pine and wildflowers. Under different circumstances, Eliza might have enjoyed the journey. As it was, every snapping twig and rustle in the underbrush made her jump. "How much further?" she asked as the afternoon wore on and the trail grew steeper. "There's another cabin about 3 miles ahead," Isaac replied. "More isolated than the last. We should reach it before sundown." The landscape grew more rugged, the forest giving way to rocky outcroppings and small meadows bright with late summer blooms. Eliza found herself marveling at the beauty despite their circumstances. "I've never been this far into the mountains," she admitted. Isaac glanced back at her, a small smile softening his features. "It's something, isn't it? First time I saw these peaks, I knew I'd never want to leave Colorado." "Even after everything that's happened?" Eliza asked. "Even after," he confirmed. "Bad men don't make a place bad, this land. It has a way of healing what's broken if you let it." The wisdom in his words struck Eliza deeply. Perhaps that was what she needed, not just escape from her uncle, but healing from years of grief and subjugation. The second cabin was smaller than the first but more remote, perched on a ledge overlooking a steep valley. A small stream gurgled nearby, providing fresh water. Isaac inspected it thoroughly before declaring it safe. "We can stay here a few days," he said as they unsaddled the horses. "Let the initial search die down." That night, as they sat by the fire eating a rabbit Isaac had snared, Eliza found herself studying him more openly. He was not classically handsome like some of the young cowboys who occasionally visited the ranch. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. But there was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that she found increasingly compelling. "Tell me about yourself," she requested suddenly. "Before Raven Creek, before the war." Isaac looked surprised, then thoughtful. "Not much to tell. Grew up on a small farm in Missouri. Parents died when I was 16. Worked neighboring farms until the war broke out." His expression darkened. "After that, well, I already told you, drifted a lot." "No family?" Eliza asked gently. He shook his head. "No, just my uncle, unfortunately. My parents died in a fever outbreak 3 years ago. Uncle Douglas was my father's brother, my only living relative." Eliza stared into the fire. "My father was nothing like him. He was kind, gentle. He taught me to read, encouraged my interest in books. My mother taught me to sew and garden, but also to appreciate beauty in music and nature." "They sound like good people," Isaac said softly. They were. Tears pricked at Eliza's eyes. "I miss them every day." Without thinking, Isaac reached across the space between them and took her hand. His touch was warm, calloused from years of ranch work, but infinitely gentle. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Eliza didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand to clasp his. "Thank you. For listening. For caring." They sat like that, hands joined, as the fire burned down to embers and the night deepened around the small cabin. Something was growing between them, fragile but undeniable. Neither was ready to name it yet, but its presence filled the silence with a strange, sweet tension. The next few days established a simple routine. Isaac hunted and checked the surrounding area for signs of pursuit, while Eliza tended to the cabin and prepared what meals she could from their limited provisions. They talked more freely, sharing stories of their pasts and cautious hopes for the future. On the third morning, Isaac returned from his perimeter check with a troubled expression. "Riders in the valley," he reported. 6 men armed, moving slowly like they're searching." Eliza's heart sank. "The posse, looks like it." Isaac's jaw tightened. "They're still a good distance away, but they're methodically checking every trail and cabin." "Will they find us here?" Eliza asked, fear creeping back into her voice. Isaac considered. "Eventually, yes. This cabin is off the main trails, but it's known to locals. We need to move on." "Where?" "If they're searching the mountains, not west," Isaac decided. "North, into the high country. There are places up there even experienced trackers rarely visit. It'll be rough going, but it might be our best chance." They packed hastily, taking only what they could easily carry. As they prepared to leave, Eliza paused at the cabin door, looking back at the simple space that had briefly been a sanctuary. "It'll be all right," Isaac assured her, misreading her hesitation. "I won't let them take you back to your uncle." Eliza looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close he stood, of the determination in his dark eyes. "I know," she said softly. "I trust you." Something shifted in Isaac's expression, surprise, followed by a warmth that made Eliza's breath catch. For a moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he gently touched her cheek with rough fingertips. "We should go," he said, his voice husky. The trail they followed now was barely visible, more a suggestion than a proper path. It climbed steeply through increasingly rocky terrain, testing both riders and horses. By midday, they had reached an elevation where the air grew noticeably thinner, and patches of snow lingered in shadowed hollows despite the summer heat. "How much further?" Eliza asked during a brief rest to water the horses at a small alpine stream. "There's a place I know," Isaac replied, scanning the rugged landscape. "An old mining claim that was abandoned years ago. It's about 5 miles further, near timber line. Remote enough that even if they extend their search this far, they're unlikely to find it." The final miles were the most challenging. The trail all but disappeared in places, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses across treacherous scree slopes and around massive boulders. Eliza's muscles screamed in protest, but she pressed on without complaint, driven by the knowledge that safety lay ahead. Late afternoon shadows were lengthening when Isaac finally pointed to a small, weathered structure nestled against a cliff face, almost invisible against the gray stone. "There it is," he said with evident relief. The abandoned mine consisted of a small cabin built from native stone and timber, with a collapsed mine entrance nearby. Despite its remote location, the cabin was surprisingly sturdy, its thick walls designed to withstand the harsh mountain winters. Inside, a layer of dust covered everything, but the roof was intact and the stone fireplace appeared functional. A crude table, 2 chairs, and a platform bed frame filled most of the single room. "It's perfect," Eliza declared, sinking gratefully onto one of the chairs. Isaac smiled at her enthusiasm. "It's not exactly comfortable living, but it should be safe. After everything we've been through, safety matters more than comfort," Eliza assured him. They settled in quickly, falling into now familiar roles. Isaac gathered firewood and checked the chimney for obstructions, while Eliza swept away the worst of the dust and arranged their meager belongings. That evening, as they sat before the fire sharing the last of Martha's bread and some dried beef, a comfortable silence enveloped them. The wind whispered around the cabin's sturdy walls, and the occasional call of a night bird punctuated the mountain quiet. "You think they'll give up soon?" Eliza asked eventually. Isaac considered. "Hard to say. Your uncle strikes me as a stubborn man. But even he can't keep men away from their homes and work indefinitely. A few more days, perhaps a week, and the search should die down." "And then what?" Eliza looked into the flames. "I can't go back to Pine Creek. They'll look for me there." "No," Isaac agreed. "But once the immediate danger passes, we could head north. Wyoming, maybe, or even Montana Territory, somewhere your uncle's influence doesn't reach." Eliza repeated softly. "You keep saying that." Isaac met her gaze, his expression solemn. "I meant what I said before, Eliza. My path is with yours now if you'll have me. But if you prefer to make your own way once you're safe, I'll understand." Eliza studied him in the firelight, this quiet, steadfast man who had risked everything to help her. Over the past days, she had come to see beyond his reserved exterior to the depth of character beneath. His kindness, his unwavering integrity, his gentle strength all had gradually worked their way into her heart. "I don't want to be alone anymore," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Something kindled in Isaac's eyes. He reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his. "You won't be." The promise in those simple words made Eliza's heart race. Impulsively, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a brief, gentle kiss. Isaac remained perfectly still for a moment, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then, with infinite tenderness, he raised his hand to cup her cheek, deepening the kiss with a restrained passion that took Eliza's breath away. When they finally parted, both were trembling slightly, overwhelmed by the significance of what had just transpired. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you in Martha's kitchen," Isaac confessed, his voice rough with emotion. Eliza smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that transformed her face. "I'm glad you waited until now, until I could see you clearly." They spoke little more that night, content to sit close together before the fire, hands intertwined, occasionally exchanging soft kisses that grew increasingly confident. When exhaustion finally claimed them, Isaac insisted on taking the floor despite Eliza's protests. "There will be time," he assured her with a gentle smile, "when you're ready, when we're both sure." Eliza slept more peacefully that night than she had in years, lulled by the sound of Isaac's steady breathing and the knowledge that, perhaps for the first time since her parents' death, she was not alone. The days that followed took on an almost dreamlike quality. Isolated from the world below, Eliza and Isaac established a simple routine dictated by necessity and the harsh mountain environment. Isaac taught her to fish in the small alpine lake nearby, to identify edible plants, to move quietly through the forest. Each day he would make a careful circuit of the surrounding area, watching for any sign of pursuit, but the posse never ventured so high into the mountains. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, talking late into the night. Isaac shared stories of his travels after the war, of the vast landscapes he had crossed, and the people he had met. Eliza spoke of her childhood, of her dreams of someday teaching or perhaps opening a small dressmaking shop. As the days passed, their physical closeness grew more natural. A casual touch, a lingering embrace, kisses that grew increasingly passionate. Yet Isaac never pressed for more, seeming content to let their relationship unfold at its own pace. A week after their arrival at the mining cabin, Isaac returned from his daily patrol with a grim expression. "I went further down the mountain today," he reported as Eliza looked up from mending a tear in her skirt. "Found tracks, fresh ones, 4 or 5 riders moving up into the high country." Eliza's hand stilled. "The posse looks that way." Isaac ran a hand through his hair. "They're persistent, I'll give them that. But they're still following the main trails. If we stay put and keep a low profile, they should pass us by." For the next 2 days, they remained vigilant, keeping the fire small to minimize smoke and venturing outside only when necessary. On the 3rd morning, Isaac crept out before dawn to scout the area. He returned mid-morning, his expression lighter than it had been in days. "They're gone," he announced. "Headed back down the mountain. I watched them from the ridge, looked like they were giving up the search in this area." Relief washed over Eliza. "Do you think it's over?" "Not entirely," Isaac cautioned, "but it's a good sign. Another week and they'll likely call off the search completely. Your uncle can't afford to keep men away from their regular work indefinitely." That night, as they celebrated with a feast of freshly caught trout and wild berries, Eliza found herself watching Isaac across the firelight. The past weeks had changed him subtly, or perhaps they had simply allowed her to see the man who had always been there, beneath the quiet exterior. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her gaze. "That I'm glad you lit that lantern," she replied honestly. Even though I didn't come back that night, Isaac smiled. I would have kept it burning for as long as it took. Why? Eliza asked, though she thought she knew the answer now. Because from the moment I saw you, I recognized something in you that called to me. Isaac's voice was low, intimate in the cabin's close confines. A strength that matched your gentleness. A light that refused to be extinguished, no matter how hard your uncle tried to dim it. Eliza moved around the fire to sit beside him, her heart full. And now, Isaac said, drawing her into his arms, I think perhaps we've both found what we were looking for, even if we didn't know we were searching. Their kiss was different this time, deeper, more urgent, filled with a hunger that had been building between them for days. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Eliza made her decision. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I think perhaps I began to love you the moment you appeared in Martha's kitchen, having followed me all that way just to warn me. Isaac's arms tightened around her. I love you too, Eliza, more than I thought possible. That night, they shared the narrow bed, their coming together both tender and passionate, a culmination of the trust and love that had grown between them in the crucible of their shared journey. Afterward, as Eliza lay in Isaac's arms, listening to the wind around their mountain sanctuary, she felt a sense of peace she had not known since before her parents' death. What happens now? She asked softly, tracing the outline of a scar on his shoulder, a relic of his war days. Isaac was quiet for a moment, his fingers gently combing through her hair. I've been thinking about that. We can't stay here indefinitely. Winter comes early in the high country and it's brutal. But if your uncle is still searching, going back down is risky. So we go north like you suggested before. Yes, Wyoming Territory is growing fast. New settlements, new opportunities. We could start fresh there where no one knows us or your uncle. As husband and wife, Eliza asked, her heart beating faster at the thought. Isaac shifted to look into her eyes, his expression solemn. If you'll have me. I know this isn't the courtship you deserved, Eliza. No proper proposal, no ring, no family blessing. But I swear I'll spend my life trying to make you happy. Tears welled in Eliza's eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll have you, Isaac Blackwood. His kiss was gentle, reverent, a sealing of the vows they had just exchanged in the simplest, most honest way possible. 2 days later, they began preparations for their journey north. Isaac made one final scouting trip down the mountain, returning with the welcome news that there was no sign of the posse. I think they've given up, he reported. At least in this area. We should still be cautious, but I believe we can safely start our journey. Their preparations were simple. They had little enough to pack. Eliza found herself looking around the tiny cabin with an unexpected sense of nostalgia. For all its crudeness, it had been the place where she had truly found herself and found love. We can come back someday, Isaac said, reading her thoughts with uncanny accuracy. When all this is far behind us. Eliza smiled, touching his cheek gently. I'd like that. They departed at dawn, following a different trail than the one they had used to ascend. This route would take them north along the ridge before dropping down into the next valley, avoiding the more traveled paths where they might encounter others. The journey was arduous but exhilarating. Each mile took them further from Eliza's past and closer to their shared future. By the 3rd day, they had left the high mountains behind, descending into the rolling foothills that would eventually give way to the vast plains of Wyoming Territory. They traveled cautiously, avoiding settlements where news of a missing woman and a reward might have spread. Instead, they camped by streams and in sheltered groves, existing on what they could hunt or gather and the dwindling supplies from Martha's store. One evening, as they sat beside their small campfire, Isaac suddenly grew quiet, his expression thoughtful. What is it? Eliza asked, concerned by his sudden change in mood. "I was just thinking," he said slowly, "about the night you left, about lighting that lantern and watching you ride away. And, and wondering if you would have come back eventually, if things had been different." Eliza considered the question seriously. "I don't know," she admitted. "I was so determined to escape, to start a new life, but I was also terrified and alone." She reached for his hand. "Maybe not that night or the next, but someday perhaps. The light you offered was the only kindness I'd known in a very long time." Isaac squeezed her hand gently. "I would have waited, however long it took." Their journey continued northward. At a small trading post well away from the usual routes, they found a traveling preacher who, for a modest fee, was willing to perform a simple wedding ceremony with the trader and his wife as witnesses. Eliza wore her cleanest dress, with wildflowers in her hair. Isaac had managed to trade his pocket watch for a simple gold band that now rested on her finger, a constant reminder of their commitment. "Mrs. Blackwood," Isaac murmured that night as they lay together beneath the stars. "How does it sound?" "Like the beginning of a new story," Eliza replied, nestling closer to his warmth. They crossed into Wyoming Territory a week later, the landscape opening up into vast prairies broken by gentle hills and meandering rivers. In a small but growing settlement called Cedar Ridge, they found what they were looking for: a community far enough from Colorado to be safe, but civilized enough to offer opportunities. The town needed skilled workers of all kinds to support its growth. Isaac's experience as a ranch foreman quickly secured him a position with a local cattle operation, while Eliza found work sewing for the mercantile. Within months, they had saved enough to put a down payment on a small plot of land just outside town. "It's not much," Isaac apologized as they stood on the bare ground where their home would eventually stand. "Just 10 acres, enough for a house, a garden, maybe a few horses." "It's perfect," Eliza assured him, her arms wrapped around his waist as they surveyed what would become their future. "It's ours." With the help of neighbors and friends they had made in Cedar Ridge, they built a simple but sturdy cabin before winter set in. It was small, just 2 rooms to start, but to Eliza, who had lived under her uncle's roof for 3 miserable years, it was a palace. As the seasons turned, they added to their holdings bit by bit. A proper barn for the horses Isaac was breeding. A larger garden where Eliza grew vegetables and herbs. Inside their home, curtains at the windows and quilts on the bed added touches of comfort and beauty. Letters occasionally reached them from Martha in Pine Creek, who reported that Douglas Montgomery had eventually given up his search, telling anyone who would listen that his ungrateful niece had run off with a horse thief. The story caused a brief stir, but was soon forgotten as more immediate concerns occupied the residents of the small Colorado settlement. "He'll never find us now," Isaac assured Eliza one evening as they sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson. "No," she agreed, her hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her belly where their first child grew. "Our life is here now." Isaac covered her hand with his own, his eyes filled with a wonder that never failed to touch Eliza's heart. "When I lit that lantern the night you left, I never imagined this is where we'd end up." "And if you had?" Eliza asked, leaning against his shoulder. "I'd have lit 100 lanterns to guide us here," he replied, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple. 5 years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Their family grew with the birth of a son they named James, after Isaac's father, and a daughter they called Sarah, after Eliza's mother. The small ranch prospered under Isaac's careful management, and Eliza's skill with a needle brought in additional income through the dresses and fine linens. she created for the wealthier residents of Cedar Ridge. Word reached them occasionally of Douglas Montgomery's declining fortunes. Without Eliza to work the house and garden, and with Isaac no longer managing his ranch hands, Raven Creek had fallen into disrepair. Montgomery's drinking and gambling had worsened, and eventually he had been forced to sell the ranch to cover his debts. "You ever regret it?" Isaac asked Eliza one night after she had read aloud the latest letter from Martha containing this news. "Leaving as you did, the hardships we faced." Eliza looked around their comfortable home, at their children sleeping peacefully in the adjoining room, and finally at the man who had risked everything to help her find freedom and love. "Never," she said with absolute certainty. "Not for a single moment." Outside, a lantern burned on their porch, as it did every night, not as a beacon for anyone lost, but as a reminder of how their journey together had begun. From that first desperate flight into the darkness to the life they had built together, the light had guided them home. As Isaac took his wife in his arms, he thought about the night he had watched her flee into the darkness, not knowing if she would ever return. He had lit a lantern and waited, hoping but uncertain. What he could not have known then was that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a single act of courage, hers in fleeing, his in waiting, and that love, like a lantern in the wilderness, could illuminate paths neither had imagined possible. In the years that followed, their family and their ranch continued to prosper. 2 more children joined their family, twins, a boy and a girl they named Benjamin and Rebecca. The original small cabin grew into a proper ranch house, with a wide porch where the family gathered on summer evenings to watch the sunset and tell stories. Eliza never forgot that night of desperate flight, when she had tried to escape in the dead of night, not knowing that a cowboy had lit a lantern and would wait for her return. Though she hadn't returned that night as he might have hoped, they had found their way to each other through hardship and danger, forging a bond stronger than any they might have formed in more ordinary circumstances. Their love story became something of a legend in Cedar Ridge, told and retold with various embellishments over the years. But Isaac and Eliza knew the truth of it, that sometimes the greatest acts of love are the simplest. A lantern lit against the darkness, a hand extended in help, a heart opened despite the risk of pain. And on each anniversary of the night Eliza fled Raven Creek Ranch, Isaac would light a special lantern and place it in their bedroom window, a private reminder of the journey that had brought them together and the light that had guided them home.